Yes, we are seeing your screen.
All right. Oh, response to that. Okay. Playing with the controls. Excellent. Well, welcome everybody. I'm so glad to see that. I guess there's folks in person, there's folks hybrid. I've got folks that I know from higher ed joining from all across the country. This is kind of cool. So I like that. The hybrid aspect of the event means we get folks from well outside of California attending, which is a lot of fun. As Shiva said, I'm going to talk a little bit about my career journey, which is nothing specifically to do with Education Cloud, but this is a community group meeting, and it is often the case that folks do want to know something about career journeys and career experiences and how people get to where they do. I think that that everybody's story in the Salesforce ecosystem is super interesting, because there really aren't a lot of front doors to the Salesforce ecosystem. So someone almost always has an interesting story of arrival. I am Corey Stone. My current position is I'm a director of professional services in education at Cloud for Good. And that means that I lead usually pretty large implementation projects, implementation teams, implementing solutions for higher ed. At Cloud for Good, we only serve higher ed and nonprofit, which is really nice. We can have a lot of focus on impact organizations. I have been in consulting since 2022. So I'm relatively new to consulting in the Salesforce universe. And before that, I have a much longer kind of journey that got me here. I've been in technology. I've been a technologist for my entire career. Since I lucked out with a summer internship when I was 15 at a software startup in Cambridge, Massachusetts. And I just never left, and kind of, got stuck in tech for better or worse. I've had probably every role there is in technology, from intern to tester to developer to business analyst, program manager, project manager, architect, CIO, CTO, startup founder, strategist, and so many more, all leading to being a consultant in the Salesforce universe right now. In 2016, I got into higher ed by accident, acting as a CRM strategist to enable all of Harvard University to thrive with CRM and engagement technologists across their enterprise, which was an unusual assignment at the time. There weren't that many folks in higher ed that were using CRM technology. And we have Brian Degon on. Brian Degon was already using CRM and higher ed technology. Maybe Susan Ehrlich might have been as well. But to me, it was all new in 2016. Generally in higher ed, nobody even knew how to spell CRM, let alone what to do with it. And at Harvard, we had 48 Salesforce orgs. So it turned out that people were doing a lot with Salesforce across Harvard. It's just sort of nobody really knew. And as a consultant, I went back and worked with Harvard to reboot their enterprise strategy about 2 years ago. And they were up to 94 Salesforce orgs. And they more than quadrupled their kind of net ecosystem and platform. So higher ed is coming into its own. Salesforce only purposely entered the higher ed industry in 2014. So it's a relatively new industry, and it has been one of the fastest growing by the numbers ever since. Okay. I'm really in the Salesforce ecosystem because of the community. The technology is pretty good, but the community around the technology is what really makes the whole thing work. And I really admire community groups. So I'm glad to be able to be with all of you tonight. Before joining Salesforce, I had a lot of community missions, and just kind of go over a few of them here. In the first box in the upper left, I was a Salesforce MVP, a really great collection of folks that give a tremendous amount to the ecosystem. Grateful to be part of that. Rotating up to the right, I started the higher ed community group program with Salesforce. We launched, I think we had 9 community groups that all launched together. once I got approval from the Salesforce community team to have them. And some of these continued to go on and thrive to this day. I then led the Northeast region one. We had some really great events back then, kind of in the pre-COVID era when I was running that. And we have folks that continue to lead that to this day. Community groups do a lot of good, and higher ed in particular loves to get together. So the community group model works really well for higher ed. In the lower corner, that's the Higher Ed Advisory Council. That's something I was on. If you're interested in learning more about higher ed and Salesforce, reach out to the folks on the Higher Ed Advisory Council, because they have volunteered their time and energy to be a resource and to help other institutions navigate their journey with CRM and Salesforce. In the middle, that is the very first higher ed community sprint, when we had new open source products like EDA. I hosted a couple of open source sprints at Harvard. We brought a lot of folks together. We ideated on what EDA would become in the future. And most of the things we came up with in those two sprints are what that product became later. And then all of the open source goodness merged into the single open source community sprints, which go on to this day. I know Sheba was at one of them recently. She's even got the t-shirt to prove it. And that's a really great way to build your skills, build your network, and give back to the community with open source, which is kind of a cool thing about the Salesforce community. And then in the lower right, you mentioned SoCal Dreamin'. That's Northeast Dreamin'. That's the event that I instigated and founded years ago. And our event will be on September 3rd, even though I don't run it, but I am speaking at the event. And, if you're in the New England area or you want to come visit us, hope that you can think about joining our event this year or sometime. All right. Let's get on to the Education Cloud evolution. It's a little bit of a revolution, but we'll stick with evolution for now. I think to understand where we are today, we have to kind of go back in time to the beginning. So in 2016, when I switched to higher ed and just joined Harvard, that was the very same year that Carlos Arroyo and Jason Bellin at Salesforce.org had invented this thing called HEDA, the Higher Ed Data Architecture, really off the sides of their desks, and launched it as an open source project. So immediately spotting the potential benefits of a common data architecture, especially having so many orgs at Harvard, I partnered with them and Dave Perry and Kevin Bromer and all of this good kind of early founders of the nonprofit and higher ed industries. And we brought forth those first innovation sprints at Harvard in 2017. And what I really admired about that, I rolled out a lot of EDA and a lot of NPSP as well at Harvard, is there were some really just killer features. And my favorites were the affiliated account model. So you could express very complex relationships between humans and a higher ed institution on a lot of roles all at once. And that was really helpful for Harvard, because that actually lined up really well with our institutional data model. And then we were able to, we had a target we could hit, and it was reliable, and we could extend it and we could install it. And that was really helpful. Both NPSP and EDA we went from HEDA to EDA because we wanted to generalize it for education, had person-to-person relationships under that relationship object. So you could relate people to people, which was super helpful. And then the kind of that whole core side of the data model, which represented this kind of combination of PeopleSoft and Banner. And it wasn't really one mashup of both. And that really helped to create a target that could interoperate with popular SIS in the ecosystem. So just having that common target that you could hit also meant that people could build packages on top of the platform that used the model. And I actually built managed packages at Harvard that I could distribute at Harvard because I had a common model that I could use. The other thing that was really cool was something called table-driven trigger management. And this was just a really great way to manage automations without kind of hiding them hiding the managed capabilities. You could sort of expose and extend them considering it was open source and not really there were no IP concerns, so that kind of kept it open. And then it went along the way, and more and more things were added to the stack as time went on. In 2019, Salesforce started creating custom managed packages for specific capabilities, like what became Student Success Hub. And then, in 2020, I was working at Salesforce. I was on the product team, and the primary product I worked on was something called Admissions Connect, which I think is really awesome and has a lot of nice capabilities. And there are still some folks using it. And then, we switched from from Advisor Link to Student Success Hub, which was more generalized. And then in 2023, launched what is now the new Education Cloud. So a little bit of history. But let's talk a little bit about the contrast between the two. Our managed packages were and are really awesome. They meaningfully accelerated getting from zero to a solution for education. And I think it's helpful to look at all of these things and realize they are solution first. So our approach on the product team was largely around building things to fill in gaps. So where our customers didn't have a good solution, either from the platform or from the ISVs in the ecosystem, we were looking to kind of fill in those gaps. We had a lot of folks that weren't super happy with their recruitment and admissions solutions. So we tried to come up with something that was more extensible, and that was, Admissions Connect. We could see that there were kind of a number of gaps if you wanted to do academic advising. So that started as Advisor Link and then Student Success Hub. All of these things were, inherently solution first. And I think that's important. They were on managed packages. So, that comes with some inherent complexity and challenges. But they were, really great. And if you look at, for example, NPSP is the most installed application by far on the App Exchange. EDA has thousands of installs. It's still in use, and other packages are widely in use across the ecosystem. So folks are getting a lot of value out of the managed packages, even though the going forward model has changed. So let's talk about the going forward model. We'll fast forward to 2023 and into the now. And you can note this is a really different approach because we're switching from solution first to capability first. And the Education Cloud is an industry cloud. So it's part of the whole industry cloud model. It's one of many industries, which can be really helpful. And all of these things are critically on the Salesforce core, which means that they inherently scale high. And one thing that I can tell you as someone who worked on developing things like NPSP and EDA, it was never really part of our intent to build things that scaled. It was really our intent to build things that could get people from zero to something more quickly. So that it was a different design intent. By the time the new Education Cloud came along, we had folks that were wanting to scale really high. In 2016, if you were in higher ed and you said, look, I have 200 users, you were a really big deal. That was a big implementation. That was something everyone wanted to hear about. Fast forward today, we have folks launching with thousands of users, trying to get to really high enterprise grade, enterprise scale. The ability to have all of these things on core is a big deal when it comes to scaling. Though you can see that kind of in this whole layer cake of goodness. You've got sort of the base data foundation, which I think is really helpful. To build upon. It puts semantic meaning into the solution set, and then you have the whole kind of common capability model that spans industries, and then you have these sort of bundled up capabilities across the middle, and I think more so now we're also adding advancement capabilities kind of on the top of the stack here. So really to break it down, the new Education Cloud presents a dramatic conceptual departure from legacy. So we're really going from products to capabilities. We're going from what was more prescriptive to something that's more holistic, more foundational, more platform based. And we're going from a delicious layer cake of apps to all core all the time, which inherently scales really high. So I like to think of it as we're going from what was once a la carte to a tasty all-you-can-eat buffet. And then if we go further and we say, okay, Education Cloud is an industry cloud, and that means that if somebody over in Financial Services Cloud invents something that's really useful that we can use in education, you can turn that on, and that can be made available to Education Cloud. And we were already doing this in a way, even with the managed packages. It turned out that, for example, applying to college was pretty similar to applying for a mortgage. So we had already, even back in the managed package days, we had borrowed quite a lot from Financial Services Cloud components, things like action plans and things that were built into Admissions Connect. Over having all these things on core makes it much easier to borrow innovation from one industry to the other. And then, some of these industry components, they're useful for higher ed, they're useful for all kinds of education, they're also useful for other industries. So this kind of common, capability framework scales really high. There's a lot of building and deploying many. So you take what, it's rhymes with the Salesforce philosophy of a platform. And then you're starting with the core capabilities of Salesforce, adding the core capabilities of industries, and then mixing that in with things that, are kind of non-Salesforce or off platform. Because when I go into a higher ed institution and we do an IT audit of enterprise systems, it's not in any way unusual to find 1,800, 200 or more enterprise systems in use at a large institution. And then even if we break down the ones that are CRM or MarTech or CRM-like or front end or event management, we'll still find hundreds of systems in an ecosystem. So a lot of the value that's derived from Salesforce today comes from that interoperability and extensibility and kind of the whole information network that you're weaving this technology into, especially when people want to scale. So some reflections on implementing Education Cloud. It's still, relatively early. We're only a few years in here, maybe about 3 years in at this point. I did have a front row seat to the very first implementations of Education Cloud, even before it was announced, which was sort of nice to get the preview. You also find all the bugs first and have to write all the documentation. So pros and cons to going first. But there's definitely a lot of things that I've been able to learn that I can share with all of you, and there are definitely some pros and cons. One thing to be aware of is the data architecture it's pretty comprehensive. It's a lot more than say EDA or the managed packages, but it's not yet complete. It's still kind of a work in progress, and there are still things that are being built out all the time. And I've been really encouraged to see the whole very consistent stream of innovation as things come out. Even there's a bunch of great things that were just announced in the winter release. One thing I think everyone should be aware of, and this isn't just for Education Cloud, but I'd say all industry clouds, anything that's being done to any level of complexity is almost certainly going to require Omni Studio to get some of the things done. And that's the maybe the cold hard reality of it, but it's also an opportunity. That's a really great tool set, and there's a lot. It's a multi-purpose Swiss Army knife kind of item. So it's a bit to learn for sure, but it's also super powerful. So pros and cons to that, but you're definitely going to need higher kind of skill level once you get in Omni Studio, and that's true both for implementation, but also I think from a sustaining perspective. So something to be aware of. I think it's definitely more complex to launch, to get from zero to something on Education Cloud than it is to get from zero to something on EDA or NPSP. It's got more bells, more whistles, more capabilities. It's a little bit it's going to be a little bit more of a hurdle to approach, but there is more value on the other side to be found. And then, I think it's been maybe a little bit of adjustment in the sense that not only has industry cloud been centralized, but also support has been centralized. So, we don't have the same level of luxury or level of support that kind of we once did for our industry when it was a little bit more independent. So that's just the reality of how things are. And there are pros and cons to every one of these things. And then if we think about the data architecture, this is really helpful. The semantic meaning that comes with all of this is incredibly helpful. It gives people a starting point. It's a logical, sensible structure. You don't have to come up with all of this yourself. And I admire that this was all done, and there's still a fair amount of flexibility in what you can do with it. So that balance of sort of having a prescriptive data architecture and being able to make it flexible, and some of the newer features are out to make it even more flexible. I do admire that kind of design philosophy. We had that when I was on the product team at Salesforce, and that continues to be part of the ethos. This one is really tough. So it is the case that industry clouds are on person accounts, and this does create some challenges and also some opportunities. I think the main challenge with person accounts and particularly the education industry is person accounts are, if you think about it conceptually, inherently B2C. So the Salesforce platform out of the box is inherently B2B. The account is the center of the universe. The people are associated with the account, and it goes on and on. As so says Benioff, right? And that's the way it was. That's the way it's been. There have been a lot of attempts to make the Salesforce platform more B2C, and this is kind of the latest one is industry clouds, and person accounts was one of those attempts. So this on the other side is really great, but if you think about it, higher ed probably has the most complex relationship models the world has ever seen. And so flipping higher ed into the least complex relationship model where the contact becomes the account and it's all one thing is a big flip. And then the complexity of those relationships needs to be assembled elsewhere in the model. So I think part of the reason that's important is that this is one of the top reasons why it is difficult to migrate from any other kind of structure of Salesforce over to Education Cloud without essentially doing what amounts to essentially a redeploy, right? Because it's just the data model is so different, the account model is different, and that's like the sun revolves around the moon stuff. What we've generally found is you're talking about a redeploy. There are advantages of doing that. There are pros of doing that, cons of doing that. But there's no such thing as a point and click migration tool, right? It's not going to be that easy. You're really going to have to think it through. But there are a lot of advantages to this. It scales really high. We had a lot of challenges managing accounts in something like EDA because we had all these workarounds that kind of didn't make any sense. So there are definitely some really nice benefits to this model, but there are also some costs. And then if we look at this data architecture, if you think about the ERD, it is a lovely combination of things that are just foundational to Salesforce. There are things that are pretty specific to recruitment and admissions. There are things that are pretty specific to learner success. There are now things that are specific to advancement. And then as part of learner success, the latest and greatest and coolest thing is that there are SAS capabilities and SAS components, which I'll talk about a little bit later. And also that is my talk at Northeast Freeman next week is all about the SAS components on Salesforce. I will talk about that a little bit. So just to kind of recap, this is an industrial revolution, and Salesforce is now an industry cloud, and we as an industry are in a way a little less special, but also a little more blessed because we get the benefit from all of these all the innovation across all of the industries. And then in order to pull this off, the teams are going to have to skill up on new features, tools, Omni, a different kind of data model. There are a lot of components and things to piece together. So more goes into it, but more comes out of it too. And then, the other thing that goes along with scaling. So, part of the reason for going to Education Cloud in the first place is to achieve scaling for most of the folks that we're working with. And that just means that this sort of organizational change management that goes into getting to an implementation on Salesforce at a higher scale just becomes more important than it ever was before. So let's break it down a little bit. We can look at kind of these layer cakes, right? So recruitment admissions, you have that whole foundational layer at the bottom of the cake. You've got all these industry components that contribute to value to the overall solution, and then have these functional capabilities across the top that you're hoping to achieve. And that's the whole concept. That's the layer cake, and that makes it extensible and extendable. And there's a lot of value in that. And then if we look at student success, it's got a slightly different layer cake, but industry common components still, right? It's the same kind of data foundation. You're just pointing at different objects and fields. And then you've got just a different set of capabilities that are kind of bound to that student success across the middle. And increasingly, some of these items you'll look like degree comparison, degree planning. These are new things that you couldn't do before. They're all they're SIS type components that are being added in, which is very cool. And then there's a lot happening in the advancement and alumni engagement space. So somebody mentioned nonprofit cloud. There are definitely a lot of things that can be shared between people who are doing fundraising in a higher ed context, people who are doing fundraising in a nonprofit context. There is a lot that can be shared between these two things. It's not exactly the same, but there's definitely some things that can be shared. And I think we're getting to, this is really new, we're getting to the point where folks are choosing to scaffold their advancement organizations directly on Salesforce using Education Cloud. Very emergent, but the common way that that's done today on Salesforce is with managed packages, and the managed packages is nothing against them. They're very good. It's just, it's a different model, and there are definitely advantages to being able to use a native Salesforce. And there are definitely still, advantages to using the popular managed packages. I've implemented the managed packages for many years, so I know a lot more about that. But we've got, a Cloud for Good. We had the very first implementation of Education Cloud for Advancement at Babson. I still rate them as the top trailblazer. And then we have some really large institutions that are adopting this now. So a lot more to come on that, but I'm very excited about the fact that Salesforce is making investments in this area all the time. And then, so, these are the new things. I kind of mentioned what's happening, but let's look a little bit at the roadmaps. We've got, for SIS. So I'm grateful to have the very first SIS client at Cloud for Good, Jessup University in Sacramento. They are the first adopters of SIS on Salesforce, and that's an active implementation right now. And they're first mover, and we're kind of on the edge of what's built and what's not built, and we're having to, it definitely comes, there's pros and cons to going first, right? We're having to build things that we know Salesforce is going to build later so that we can get that operational. But we also get to benefit from their innovation stream going forward. So that's something that we'll be rolling that out early next year. But we're kind of like deep in discovery right now, and it's really fun to see, have that front row seat to all of the new SAS components coming out of Salesforce. I mentioned it, advancement. Babson is still that trailblazer, the one to go to. And then there's a whole kind of data layer and AI thing that's going on, and there are AI and agent force components that are being released that are specific to use cases in higher ed, and that is very cool. But I do feature DePaul here because they are I don't know if I could call them kind of the first adopters of Data Cloud, but they, their story is the most impressive that I've seen, and they have just a most amazing use cases that are going on for Data Cloud, and they, then that will empower them to do a lot of agentic work as well. So definitely reach out to them if you want to be inspired. So thinking about Salesforce as an SaaS, this whole thing really started back in 2024 with some of these pathway components, and pathways was something that we had a managed package around even before industries were going, and then the earliest releases were some aspects of degree planning and learn progress, but it's really June 2025 where the SAS has its own SKU. It's something you can buy as an add-on. And there's a lot that's in there around degree planning. And we're doing degree audits with Jessup. So there's a lot happening. And I'll talk a little bit about some of the things that are in the release notes that just came out a couple of days ago that we're excited about, that we don't have all the details on them, or in some cases I do, but I can't yet share them publicly. And then, if we think about this whole progression for advancement, I think it would be helpful to think about, the way that people use Salesforce in a fundraising context. It's definitely a little bit more, experience first, where if you were to buy a point solution for advancement, it would be really have a core around gift processing, prospect management, more back end type things. Salesforce comes in more from the front end things, but if you see kind of into the most recent release, right, it's got gift planning, volunteer management, and then eventually it's going to have kind of all these features. And we've got back in some pretty high batch gift entry, which we did an attempt back in the managed package days. I wouldn't say it went really well, but here that can really scale. So definitely working kind of from the experience edge into the transactional core for advancement organizations. And there's new things coming out here all the time. I'm very excited about this innovation stream. And then if we think about Data Cloud, there's a lot happening on Data Cloud specific to education, the canonical model for education, and get into Data Cloud, which is really helpful. Then we can start building things on top of Data Cloud. Then we can start adding AI and Agentforce onto Education Cloud more easily once Data Cloud is in that mix. So excited about that stream of innovation too, into our more kind of agentic future. But also, winter is almost here. It's always funny we talk about winter release while it still feels like summer, but there is no autumn release. So that's what we're talking about. And the release notes just came out a few days ago. These are a few things that I'm really excited about coming up in the next release. There's a lot of nice things about improving that workflow around applications. There's a lot happening in the course credit transfer area, which is a huge pain point in higher education. And I think Salesforce is particularly good at building matching engines, so I think that could become something that's really huge. And there aren't a lot of good solutions out there, even point solutions. There's going to be a lot. They already have student holes, but that's an area where there's kind of new innovation going on, and there's a lot more kind of ability to customize roles in the SAS that's in there. So I've been reading up on these release notes. I'm excited about it. And then advancements really getting into that gift planning around just for gift planning out in the future. I think that's going to be really helpful. And then into that philanthropic research space. And these are all things that you really need to have if you want a fully functioning organization. So, and then, I think the question, should you switch, right? And there are technical aspects to this, right? But I think because it's not, you don't just click here to upgrade, right? And there aren't really a lot of migration tools. This is more of a strategic business question in a way, right? there are technology aspects to it, but ultimately this is a business decision. And that's a little bit of specialty area of mine, is that kind of enterprise CRM strategy. I've worked with some of the largest institutions in the world to develop enterprise-wide CRM strategy, really looking to see how they can get the most value out of the platform, but also how to weave the CRM technology into the systems and capabilities that they have. And a lot of this is people process side. And these sort of 5 pillars, I developed these at Harvard. I've carried them around with me. They're working pretty well. I haven't found a 6th pillar. This tends to work pretty well. But you really do want to focus on the people process sides, right? Not every organization is ready for this sort of change. Not every organization has the funding or the backing for it, or the vision, in a lot of cases, to be able to go up in enterprise. And if you're going up more in enterprise scale, Education Cloud makes a lot more sense for you. You're likely to get a lot more business value out the other side. And if we break this down, this is sort of my menu of goodness from the pillars. I find that these work pretty well everywhere I go. I don't change these very often. But these are all kind of those dimensions to look at. Across the top, you've got those people process kind of dimensions, right? Like, you have the staffing, you need to pull it off. Where are you going to get the skills and the training to do it? Do you have the organizational maturity around governance? And is it an institutional priority? Do you have executive backing? Things like that, they matter a lot. And does it line up with your service delivery model? These are organizational facts that would suggest whether you'd want to make an investment in something like Education Cloud, or moving to Education Cloud, so that you can scale up and get some of these benefits. And then at the bottom, you've got kind of all those technology factors, which are I think also really important. And that's where I started here, with all the design and the architecture and the scaling. And then that interoperable ecosystem is increasingly how people are getting value out of Salesforce. It's not super valuable standalone at an enterprise scale. It's more, how does it weave from an integrations and interoperability standpoint into your whole kind of higher ed stack and higher ed ecosystem. That's where the big value is going to come out. That's where you're going to get big value multipliers. That's going to justify the cost and effort of adopting something like Education Cloud. So getting into my sort of David Letterman, these are some of the kind of top 10 reasons to consider Education Cloud. I think one thing that's helpful is it's really that kind of one platform. So not a collection of managed packages. It's one platform. You do get it. There are some SKUs and add-ons and all that, but it's all on core. And then I think this sort of Student 360, but I'll go bigger and I'll say the new Education Cloud makes it possible to attain what very few were able to, which is the idea you could think about using the same platform potentially for student use cases, but also alum and external affairs use cases. That becomes more possible. It may not be organizationally desirable, but it becomes technically possible to scale out to a lot of use cases, which really wasn't something that was practical, rarely seen before Education Cloud, but becomes possible. There's certainly all the AI and AI aspects that are being built in. It's easier to get from zero to something in an AI context because that's where they're making innovation. The Data Cloud add-on, that's really helpful, and they put the education a data model out into that, which is a huge big deal. Sometimes education is not the biggest industry at Salesforce. They don't always get all the attention, but that's one place where they did, which is really great. You definitely get the scalability, all that automation. And then, I think number 9, that subscription to innovation is an important reason, because this is where Salesforce is making investments. So, you can definitely stick with some of the really great managed packages of the past, and I do admire those. But the innovation's happening over here. So once you make the switch, you're getting that subscription to innovation, and it just arrives with your next release. So top 10. And then that's really all I had, but happy to talk about all of this. I'm hopeful that maybe some folks can share their own experiences here if they've approached Education Cloud or they're thinking about it. We've got a few higher ed people on the call. Brian, what do you think? Brian Degon is from higher ed. What's Brian think?
Hey, Corey. Nice to see you again.
I'm calling you out.
Yeah, well, so, I recently departed Worcester Polytechnic, as you know, Corey. I think that we were at a critical stage as a university due to, a lot of competing priorities to really decide what our future was going to be with CRM and with Education Cloud. And, I think that the university decided not to go in that direction. Right. So I think that you make a really great point in the presentation here about how, institutional priorities factor into a lot of this decision making. And it's probably one of the most important things in terms of a success factor. Right. We were at one point very distributed development type of organization, right, where we could adopt solutions that were the best for the individual businesses, so advancement, online programs, graduate programs. We had a lot of different solutions. That's been, I don't know if that was ever common in higher ed, right? But this idea of citizen developers was definitely not unique to WPI. WPI has kind of shifted away from that, right? So, CRM, there's no strategy, right, at our university. I can still say ARC because I'm an alumnus and my daughter's a freshman there. So
you're all in. Come on.
Guy. I got the banner hanging behind me, right? So
you're highly tied to the place.
Yeah, well, but I think that watching this presentation, because I've been keeping my eye out for Education Cloud, but I think that another thing that we had experienced is we did a lot of custom build stuff internally, in-house build, before Education Cloud was released, right? So now you talked about big switching costs from Salesforce to Salesforce, right? Not no system to a new system. But looking at the current capabilities and the roadmaps, where it's just been in the last 12 months, right? Which some of that was new to me. It's actually really encouraging to think about the ways that this could be adopted in organizations that have, this customer-centric, center of excellence that, that they're going to address with a Salesforce product or even a CRM product in general, which I think most people on this call know that if you're looking at CRM for higher ed, right, you're really down to, maybe two choices, right? But it becomes clear that the investment is probably more well spent in the Salesforce environment, right? And this is all why. So it's actually really exciting to see that some universities are still adopting and that there are, new products being adopted by well-known universities. And I think there's a lot of potential out there. And, me as a higher ed, I've been in higher ed for 23 years, right? So I would like to stay in higher ed, but I'm really just like Corey is a technologist, right? I found a home in higher ed and I'd like to stay here. So it's really encouraging to see all the developments that are going on. And, I can certainly see a lot of ways that, that this platform could help all kinds of universities. I can't reverse engineer it to WPI anymore, but in my next opportunity, I think this is going to be a core of it.
Yeah, and WPI was one of those institutions that really had a single org and used it for advancement and used it for academic purposes and used it for recruitment admissions, right? And that's very unusual. There are very few that did that. And it's like this. Yeah, finally, now they built the thing you needed, right? Now they've built the thing you needed back in 2014 when you joined. So that's a lot of fun. I don't know. I've been calling Susan because I know I recognize people from higher ed, and I don't know. Susan, do you have a perspective? You've been at this a long time.
I have been at this a long time, and I will say, at CU we are moving to Education Cloud. I would say
Great.
some of the largest challenges we're seeing is we have a 10-year-old Salesforce implementation on the sales platform. And so our primary area of focus over the last decade has really been student success. And we have a very, very mature, well-developed, well-defined org within that vertical. And an additional pain point is that we also have a different CRM for recruitment and admissions, which is also well-developed and almost a decade old. So we have two very well-defined CRM implementations for those two primary verticals that you mentioned. We have a separate Salesforce org for advancement, so we're really talking about CU Boulder. And you know that there's
I've
a
worked
lot
on that one, so
around that.
I know something about that one.
What's that?
I've worked on that one. I know something about that one.
I think from my lens, again, I am a technologist as well. I think you're spot on sort of the executive buy-in and shared mission. I personally think Education Cloud is great if you are starting from scratch, and far more difficult if you already have an implementation. Especially, and you mentioned this in your presentation, Corey, around the person accounts and transitioning over. We are not even using EDA today, so our org predates even HEDA. So I'm kind of here just to always learn, and really I was kind of curious just what was coming out, what's down the roadmap, and it's a slow transition. It's a slow I almost would say it's a slower transition to migrate than it would be to start from scratch. And I'm sure that's probably your experience as well in consulting, Corey.
Yeah, that's partly true. Though I'm not sure it's it's certainly no more difficult than migrating from different non-Salesforce platform. But there isn't a tremendous amount of uplift from the fact that you're already on Salesforce when you go to Education Cloud, because it's just so different in structure and model intent. So you're having to do a lot of interpolation, and that's the way it is.
Yeah. Yep. ETL and data migration is going to be
plenty of that. Yeah, Salesforce to Salesforce, but ETL because it's a different model.
Yep.
Yeah, lots of fun. I just called on the people I knew from higher ed, but I can't see really the people in the room. So happy to talk. Now you have a whole higher ed panel to talk to, not just Corey.
Well, Corey, while you're here, let's ask you a quick question here.
Yeah, sure.
The key thing is about talking about you said this person model, right? Like compared to person account model, that's one of the biggest lift, which is out there for a lot of people.
Big difference.
People talk about, okay, hey, there's account and contact model and all the stuff, right? They have web to lead, right? Web to lead is straightforward when you convert web to lead into a kind of the thing, an account or a person account. Plus, you also want to keep a business account too sometimes, right? So it gets complicated in certain use cases. So what is the key thing that you see on the person account, right? Like how people should view it. Sometimes most of the time you'll not need a kind of company name associated with it, but sometimes you do need it or kind of thing. So what are your thoughts on that?
I think you're for these industry models, and I think of hired right away because we used to have really complex relationships in higher ed. So, for example, at Harvard, we'd have people, we'd have some part of Harvard, and then we'd have a relationship channel between those two people. So imagine you've got one human at Harvard, they are a student in some school, right? They're an employee in some other school. They might also be an employee in a different school. They might be an adjunct instructor in another school. They may also have a library card. So, they have this sort of wealth of relationships with the institution. And some of those are active and some of those are past. My top flyer at Harvard had 39 active contractual relationships with Harvard. So we'd have to be able to express the human, all the parts of Harvard, and the relationship in between. That was really easy to do in EDA or NPSP. Here, if you first simplify and say, okay, the human is the account, you have to reconstruct that complexity downstream with other relationships. And it's not necessarily bad, because in that old model, we honestly had this like administrative account that we didn't know what to do with in this model. So that was honestly a bit of a workaround. Don't have that here, but you do have to think really careful about those multifaceted, multi-party relationships in advance, so that you can design them into your going forward model. Just because it's a little bit harder to change them later if you kind of don't get the structure right. It's not built in. The multi-factor, multi-party thing isn't fully built in. And so I think it just requires a little bit more planning and purposeful design to make sure you're retaining all of that.
All right. Thank you.
Yeah.
There are some questions in the Q&A tab.
Oh, great.
Yeah. So going from the latest one, the Education Cloud data model is quite complicated, maybe for flexibility's sake, but it is potentially over-engineered for simple use case. And we found is it to use the out-of-the-box objects. There are mandatory lookups we have to populate, which leads to we have to use the whole model. Any suggestion? Sorry, I try to.
Yeah, I mean, it's possible that if your use case is, yeah, I think it's possible if your use case is simpler and unlikely to get more complex, that these industry models are not what you're looking for. There's more overhead in running them. There's more complexity in designing them. You might need Omni. The B2B Salesforce platform is pretty good. We know and love it. We've been using it for 25 years. Sometimes the complexity isn't worth the complexity doesn't deliver the value on the other side. So I think it's something to think about, and that's true. I think for any industry cloud, you're thinking about is conventional B2B Salesforce better aligned with what you're trying to do.
Yeah, and there's also contact profile. Is this just better to just use contacts, or how does that create more complexity in the mix? Like, are you better off just to use contact and not contact profile, or should you use contact profile?
It's probably better. It's probably better to use it as intended. So their contact profile has a lot of strength, and you'll be designing in one. I think just in one direction. Otherwise, you're kind of not really using Education Cloud model. So it's gonna show up as more kind of a. There are things you can do, but those things are more on the edge, more on the workaround, and less down the center. Because at that point, you're not going to gain access to like the rest of the data model in the way it was intended.
Oh.
And I'll just add that from my experience, when you have a lot of different business units in the same org, right? 800 fields of custom fields on the contact object sounds like a lot when you start. But it's not really. So I'm guessing that the contact profile also gives you, the ability to expand to another 800 fields.
Yeah, it's a really good point. It is, it's more complex to start. You don't have to use everything in the model. That's the other thing, which is helpful to think about. Like, you may not use the whole model, and you don't have to use the whole model. So it may look a little daunting, but if you narrow it down to the parts you need, it may not be so intimidating. It's a big drawing.
Bill View, I read out your question, but you are here, so if you want, you can add to it or discuss. Come off mute.
I was asking the reason because we are implementing Education Cloud for clients right now, and we see the out-of-the-box model is very good, but we actually just need an update of it. However, what we face is to use, for example, that course offering, we need to populate the course, and the course needs the learning So a bunch of things, it goes to a stream that become really complicated. But the decision is already made, so it will be Education Cloud. So we just need to do some kind of workaround. We either automatically populate something or things like that. So that's the thing. I think the data model itself is quite good. It considers a lot of future flexibility. However, those mandatory things are a bit annoying because that makes us we have to use in the way Salesforce defined. We can't really have our own flexibility on that.
Yeah, it's definitely more prescriptive, and and assumptions are made, and some of those some of the things on the core side are assumptions that are made from typically the way that SIS does those structures, right? Because there's an intent to be able to provide some of those SIS capabilities. So you're trying to use familiar models, trying to make it so that you can integrate with another SIS. So some of that is just inherent to the way that that courses are generally structured in the ecosystem. And I think the challenge is when you get to things that are a little more alternative, right? Offerings that are different from degree offerings, for example, right? And you can get more complex. The customization is still there. But you're not building from scratch, right? You're building based on things that are prescriptive. There might be cases where you need to populate fields with something to kind of make the relationships work, for example. But it never tends to be totally fatal. But it is true. It's more prescriptive.
Yeah, on required lookup fields, which we were an EDA user, right? So we definitely had our share of those. And even some of the custom objects we put in fields that we really wanted to be make sure they were filled in, right? So even if you didn't have something to put, you had to put something, right? And so we use like TBD records and sometimes just placeholder records for fields that were required, but we weren't using, right? And you can do default values, automation tools, stuff like that to get those in there. So that's just an idea for you, Bill. If you're running into those limitations, doesn't necessarily mean you have to build all the structure, right? But you do have to have a value to put in some of those fields, right? So there are workarounds there.
Yeah, thanks. We do have workarounds
to develop it when you need it, right?
Yeah, we have that. Another thing is the documentation is quite light for the moment. So most of the explanation is we are relying on the developer side. They have like a one-liner explaining what this object does, and on the help side you have like a simple walkthrough about create records, and that's it. There are a lot of little things you can't really see until you actually create a bunch of records, and you realize, it works this way or that way.
Yeah, and that's fair. And thanks for sharing your experience. I was involved in the very first implementations of Education Cloud before it was even announced. So we had really no documentation to work on. So from my perspective, it's gotten a lot better. But I agree there are definitely a lot of missing things that this could be a lot better. Right? This is a place where Salesforce could do more for us. But I'm glad. Thanks for sharing that experience. What else did you learn? You must have learned more. You're on the front lines.
Yeah, I think it's generally a good idea. Not because I've done other industries as well, and of course you mentioned the Omni Studio. To be honest, I'm not. Yeah, we have to because that's the kind of the message from Salesforce.
Yeah.
But what I found is sometimes it behaves not very consistently and randomly. That's the key word, randomly. This morning I had a intimate problem. Yesterday was working fine, but it stopped working for maybe 2 or 3 hours this morning, and I didn't do anything. Then it back to work. So
oh well. Something with Omni not working, you said.
Yeah, the Omni part. And I've seen similar
Yeah.
problems quite a few times. So that's
Oh wow.
a bit concerned.
And you said you've worked on some other industry clouds as well?
Yeah, the public sector, the PSS.
Oh wow. Do you see a lot of similarities? That's not what I've studied.
On the Omni side, yes.
Just in
I think the
general,
data model,
does it look familiar in a way when you're in public
the
sector?
data model on public sector, I feel slightly more flexible. So the object doesn't have so many restrictions like education.
Yeah, it's a little less prescriptive. There's just less to it. Interesting. Do we have more Q&A or someone have a live question?
Neha, you had a question. Could you come off mute and ask clearly?
Yeah, thanks, Shiva. I would love to ask the question. I had a couple of questions. I was interested when Corey was talking about how he has been able to get the skill of integrating CRM approaches into the enterprise solutions. So, I was seeking his advice because I'm also a Salesforce consultant currently working at Huron, and I see Corey has also a LinkedIn Huron. So, yeah, your advice would be really appreciated, Corey. If you can suggest how can I skill up on that. And my second question was on the agent force side, where you mentioned, one of your customer has already used agent force and data cloud, and you found that using data cloud helped them, and agent was able to perform better with the data cloud data. So my question was, I mean, since the data cloud flattens the data, and education data is very typical data model, how did it help the data cloud help the agent force read the data properly or to have best capabilities, rather than just reading from the education cloud data model?
I mean, I think the big advantage to your data cloud is it really in the ability to bring in external data from other systems and make it accessible. If you think about the kind of the history of one way to, I think it's helpful to think about it from Salesforce is really more not just one platform, but a collection of platforms. Like we talk a lot about, Sales Service Cloud, the core CRM, right? People talk about that a lot, but if you think about what Salesforce has now is more of a portfolio of platforms, and kind of the most obvious one would be Marketing Cloud. I mean, Marketing Cloud is a completely different platform. It's from an acquisition. I implemented Marketing Cloud long before Salesforce owned it or called it Marketing Cloud back in 2010. And the things like the Marketing Cloud, CRM connector, that's pretty primitive. I don't think that's had much innovation on it. And then they acquire Commerce Cloud, and then acquiring more platforms. So I think one of the top use cases is really the ability to pull together all of the Salesforce products and then unite them on that data channel. And then from an agentic perspective, you're using the data from all of the platforms collectively to inform decisions. So you've got a larger learning model in play. So I think that's a big advantage on having something like Data Cloud, but it's not just, then of course, it's not just Salesforce products. In higher ed, we often have thousands and thousands of systems. So being able to augment that with data from other systems, and especially I love the zero copy, because in higher ed, we propagate so much data. You don't have the same kind of elements in 20 different systems taking up space and aging and not, it just creates a huge interoperability challenge. So I think that's a very advanced approach and a little bit different, but I think it's where everything's headed in this direction towards data platforms for unification. So the biggest advantage is access to the larger data pool. And I hope you're having a good time at Huron.
Thank you so much. I understood your approach, like of having multiple system connected to data cloud, just not the ED data. That will make certainly more sense to use Agent Force on those databases as well. But if I think just about the education cloud, specifically reading that data from Agent Force, is there a specific use case that would help having a data cloud?
You do need some aspect of data cloud, and kind of some of this you kind of get with the industry clouds, but if you take the simplest of use cases and say, okay, I want to use data on platform, just the CRM platform, right?
Mhm.
You get access to the structured data, which is super helpful. And then there's this idea that you'd really want to merge that with unstructured data. So the way
Okay.
that's generally prescribed for that is using Salesforce knowledge, the knowledge base. Because you think of it from a service center perspective, right? Those knowledge articles are the things that in a pre-AI kind of era you would use for case deflection and say, oh, I see you're trying to figure out how to get a refund on a plane ticket. Have you read this article about refunds on plane tickets, right? Because they're trying to do deflection before they bring you to a human. I think with the ability to do that in a more of a GPT kind of way, you can say you can ask the question in text, right, and then you can mine both the knowledge base and the structured data to help try to get that solution coming forward. So that's kind of the more basic use case, because you've got
Basic use case. Okay.
structured data, in the relational model, and then you've got less structured data, text documents, things like that, in that knowledge base, and then that's kind of the intention, and then you've got kind of like data cloud glues it all together. But this part's evolving really fast, though. I think, I'll just vote that over time, like data cloud will become less expensive and more be ubiquitous, and there'll be more pre-built for it. And, we saw that. Imagine if people were around long enough to remember the product called Wave, right? So Wave became CRM Analytics. When Wave came out, it was like minimum $80,000. Now, CRM Analytics is a whole lot less and more approachable.
Okay.
So,
Yeah.
I hope it will come down, because I think the biggest barrier to utilization right now is the cost.
Correct.
That's just my vote as a non-Salesforce employee.
Thank you. No, thank you for this use
Anymore.
case. I was looking forward for something very typical to Education Cloud. Yeah, I understand your solution there for Data Cloud. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then it was my question regarding some best resources to
Oh,
study.
yeah.
Omni
Well, you're
Studio.
doing some industry cloud work, right? I think you said, Shiva.
I am. I did the migration. So
Yeah. What did you experience? What did you find?
I think Sunil can tell better because I kept reflecting to him.
Yeah.
So,
You can't be shy. You're the community group leader.
no, I'm not. Oh, yeah, you can't be shy, Sunil. So, yeah, I mean, Omni Studio I haven't done, but I'm aspiring to learn it. So I always ask, as a new admin, as a beginner, how would you study? How would you start it? How start learning it?
Oh, how to start learning it. Oh, that's interesting. I mean, so I don't know. This is maybe unconventional. The way I learn, I always start with the data model. That's just everything I do. Every system I've ever learned, like, show me the data model. I just want to see the data model, and then I start learning outward from there. That's probably unconventional. I think the right Salesforce party line answer would be Trailhead, but I would start with the data model because I'm a data geek, and then I would start forming my questions based upon that. That's how I learned Salesforce in the first place. Actually, I just looked at the data model.
What would the Omni Studio data model be like? Because I was looking into Omni Studio a little bit, and yeah, if you say you're starting from the data model, how would that work?
Yeah, I think Omni is more of a toolkit than a kind of an industry product. So I think the way to learn Omni, I mean, you could think of that more as a developer tool, and so that's going to take a different learning method. It's going to be a lot more friendly to you if you've been a software developer before.
Is it flex cards, right? There's flex cards. There's all these things that are half developer, half non-developer stuff, basically.
Definitely all of that, but I think a lot of the use case is that one of the things that you can do with Omni, and a lot of the use cases are largely around going outside the relational data model, and there are a lot of use cases for being able to say, well, the thing I'm trying to do doesn't follow the relational data model that well, and I want to be able to form my own relationships in line along the way to forming a solution. So I think that's a big part of the use case. And there are other tools that do that. Example like Apsona, so a tool that it tends to be more for reporting, but it sort of allows you to break the relational model and to form new relationships on the fly and then put them out. CRMA also does that. You're trying to form relationships from a data out perspective, and you're not beholden to a relational data model. You can do what you want, and you can kind of bring in other data sources and form basically your new relational model on the fly if you want, which is really nice. But I think what Omni really does, and it was invented for, really came from manufacturing industry because it was an acquisition that Salesforce made called Velocity.
Right.
What it enables you to do is not only kind of break the model, but perform operations that are kind of extra relational database model. So that's a lot of what's happening behind the scenes.
So
it's also a Swiss Army knife, right? You can do a million things with it. But
so is this similar to like a NoSQL database, or is it like, because like you're saying like a non-relational model, right? So it's like, is it like a non-relational model? Like you're trying to, is it easier to do lookups, or like what's the use case for it? Essentially, I'm trying to get.
I think it's more of a tool. I think your data repository is still the Salesforce.
Yeah, it's the same as regular database, right? Yeah.
But you're trying to perform operations in line that you kind of break that model. So you're forming relationships on the fly so that you can accomplish a task. So it's more operational than it's not someplace you'd be persisting data.
Make like some good reports or something. Essentially, you're just trying to like.
Yeah, you can definitely use it for unique reports. You can also use it as a really great use case for it is form building tools. Very, very sophisticated form builder. Very cool, and also very can be pretty high style on the front end. I've been really impressed with kind of look and feel. So it's a lot more powerful than kind of like form building tools that you buy, but it's also more of a platform than a form builder tool. So you have to learn how to use it to be able to make it, do your bidding, right?
There's like a lot of features in it. Like I think it was also
Tons of features.
generation they had, right?
Tons of features. I mean, from a career perspective, there's a huge demand for those skills, right? So if you wanted to get into knowing how to use Omni, it'd be in super high demand everywhere because it's Swiss Army knife. It's generic to industry, and it's in super high demand because every industry has folks adopting the industry clouds, and they all need Omni skills. So it's a hard thing to find, hard thing to hire for.
I see it in a lot of job descriptions these days. I had a question about Omni. Is that does that also extend to like Experience Cloud, like on the community user side for forms and processes? Do you know, or
I don't really know the intersection with Experience Cloud. The way I've normally seen it, you're more surfacing your own front end on that, and think of it more like form assembly or something like that, right? But that's just one of many things you can do with it.
Yeah, and I've seen a lot of comparisons made between ScreenFlows and Omni Studio, right? Omni Studio kind of being like ScreenFlows on steroids, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, I've started to look into that a little bit. So yeah, I was just curious where it could be applied. Thank you.
Yeah, very powerful. You can almost see some people are using it almost like a ETL tool, right? If you imagine like you want to transform data, but you want to kind of transform data going from Salesforce to Salesforce. Well, sometimes folks are using it that way, which is sounds a little bit odd, but I've seen people do that with ETL tools as well.
And but in the Omni Studio, it'll do it on the fly as you're running through the Omni Studio, right? As opposed to, like you mentioned, CRM analytics, where you got to do some work to build a recipe and schedule it and run it and connect it and all that stuff, right? So, I
mean, CRM analytics is primary, as it says, analytics. So really more data out. I hesitate to say this, but I did have one use case where the data out became the data in with CRM analytics. Most people don't even know you can do that, and it's a little bit weird, but it's also kind of cool. So anyway, I had to say I put an asterisk on that one, but generally the intent of it is to get insights and intelligence out.
Right.
So that's a different thing. But in order to pull that off, like with Tableau or Power BI or any of those, you're often kind of breaking the source relational data model to get there.
I also have a question. What's your preferred free ETL tool to use for Education Cloud?
Free ETLs. I don't think there are any.
I love free, so.
I don't know if there are any free ETLs out in the world anymore. I mean, Talend in theory is kind of open source, but I think most people actually probably buy the one with support and that they host and all that. But I think there is still an open source aspect to it. So I do know people that are very DIY and they use Talend for free, and they're super happy with it. But I think I think to use it for free, you have to be relatively high skilled, but it is technically free.
Which one is that? Talend?
Talend.
Talend.
Talend. Talend.
Talend. Okay.
Yeah.
And that's free, but it has a huge learning curve.
It's open source. It's a little less kind of point and click. And I think if you want them to actually host it, that's when you start, kind of paying them. But in theory, it's an open source thing. You could DIY it. You could host it yourself. And I definitely know some institutions, like some institutions don't have a lot of money and they've got some talented people, and there's some I could point you to. They're basically doing all their integrations basically for free. But they're pretty sophisticated in their own knowledge, but the tool cost is low, right?
So what ETL do you use then usually?
I think I've used every single one on the market at some point in my career at this point, because there's just everywhere you go is different. When I joined Harvard, I set up MuleSoft as the first user of MuleSoft at Harvard. Salesforce didn't even own it then, so it had nothing to do with Salesforce. Okay. And that worked really well. I like Informatica Cloud. I've used that a lot. I like that really well. I've used Boomi. Boomi's very good. I've used Jitterbit. I like that. I've used Talend. I'm trying to think of some I haven't used, actually. I've used SnapLogic. I've used that.
SnapLogic is excellent.
Yeah, they all have pros and cons.
For someone doing it depends on the use cases, of course, but to like just get out of the gate, there's Zapier. Right. So if you are familiar with Zapier, take a look. And if you're not, take a look. Not really an ETL tool, but you can definitely use it in the ETL process. You can, almost get it to automate because there are schedule processes, demand tools, very inexpensive. You don't need an IT organization to spin it up for you. You can just install it and start using it. So those are a couple of things that worked really well at WPI, but we also, for the larger scale stuff, we used Informatica Cloud and SnapLogic. So
Informatica Cloud is very easy to learn at first. It's powerful later, but I did admire how quickly you can get from zero to something.
I went from login to first production integration in like 2.5 weeks.
Right. So like I said before, I don't really read the directions. So
right.
My test for ETL tool is usually, can I get data to move without reading the directions? Yeah.
Yes, exactly. Yep.
Some can't do that. MuleSoft I could not do that on MuleSoft. It's really powerful tool, amazing tool. But you're gonna have to read the directions. it's harder to learn, right? But something like Informatica Cloud, you point it at Salesforce, it renders out the data model, you're like, this looks familiar, right? And pretty quickly you're moving, at least flowing some data, right? Which I think is really, really helpful. And I got to give a plug out to something called Balance. So like my friend Chuck Liddell runs Balance. This is a native ETL tool that sits on Salesforce. He's fabulous. This tool is fabulous. It can while it sits on Salesforce, you can use it for ETL with non-Salesforce systems, of course. But the fact that it's native on Salesforce is kind of cool, and it's surprisingly low cost. And I'm always surprised more people don't know about it.
What's the name again?
Balance.
It's called Balance. Yeah. Balance. Tell Chuck I sent you. He is fabulous human, really great invention.
Got it.
Works really well, and it's surprisingly low cost.
You said there was a managed package, like App Exchange?
Yeah, it's full native on the Salesforce platform.
Awesome. So you
Built
don't
on Salesforce.
you don't have to do a SOC 2.
It's amazing. It's very cool. So if you're, I think what's great is if you're a Salesforce centric shop, or that's where the skills of your team lie, because that's what you're running. You're not introducing a new platform. It's on Salesforce. So I think that's really helpful. And I think a lot of decisions on what technology to adopt, it needs to be aligned with what your team knows and what your team loves and where to park it. I think in an ETL and like when you're choosing, ETL tools and you're choosing where to put the logic, it tends to be really important to think about where you have the skills, who's going to sustain it and all that. Because, let's say you're pairing Salesforce with, ERP or something, right? And you could put the logic on the Salesforce side, the middleware, or the ERP side. Technically it might be better to put in the middleware, but, where do you have the locus of control? Where do you have the skills? That's probably a better, point of decision. So
where do standard ETL tools like Data Loader or Workbench, they stand in terms of ETL?
I mean, I think those are more, I think of those as more file loading type tools than real ETL tools, but
file loading.
Yeah, they may have some of those. They have some of those capabilities. I mean, I'm a huge fan of Workbench, but I don't even really think of it as a data tool. I really think it's usually my SQL console.
Yep.
But anyway, that's open source, and not open source, but it's community provided.
Yeah.
It's not a Salesforce product.
Super powerful though. Workbench.
It is super powerful, but it's all run by one guy. So it's not a Salesforce product. So
yeah, there was a couple days last year when it went down. That was a rough 3 or 4 days.
Yeah, and the poor guy running it was like, it's just me. And didn't you read the warning label where you're not supposed to make it a critical system?
Yeah, but it's so critically useful that it's hard to not make it the center of your existence when you're a Salesforce person,
Yeah, and Inspector, right? Inspector is super useful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And while we're trading our favorite tools for things, if you've never seen Pack Magix, which is PACKMAGIX, check them out.
He's checking out as we go, as you're talking.
Salesforce Accelerator.
Back magic.
Yeah, it's for especially for permissions, comparisons, and permission updates and permission audits. Extremely powerful. But there's all kinds of other object, tools, and it's all free.
It's free.
I'll show one free thing because you mentioned free. I love free. I have a whole talk tracker and free tools that I do sometimes. So
best things come for free.
It's a passion area of mine. Let's see if I can get to share my screen. This is kind of cool. The person that runs Workbench, I should mention, his name is Ryan Brainard. He's super nice guy, really smart, has this massive impact in the world. He happens to work for Salesforce, but his Workbench thing has nothing to do with Salesforce. So it's just a passion thing that he does on the side. But it's had a really big impact on the community. So widely used. This one a lot of people don't know about, Toolkit for Salesforce. This is also free, and it's kind of like hosted on Heroku or something like that. It does like really basic things like org compares, data compares. I like the schema lister. You can just spit it out. It's good, helpful for the package builder is kind of cool. the bulk field creator is kind of cool. The thing I use the most though is just kind of the org compare. So if you have two orgs, even if they're not, like it doesn't have to be a sandbox in the same org potentially. You can just point at two orgs and compare them, which is super cool. But you can also use it for it's also really useful for cross-checking if you're using really any of the deployment tools. You can just see the before and the after and the differences, and it's kind of cool. And it's free. It's not super advanced, but free is good.
Yeah, you can get some. Yeah, I mean, at least you can get some utilities out of it, and that makes it.
So on the org compare, what do you like in case you're totally different architecture, right? So it will still give you some kind of, at least like, for example, if you got an old EDC, like old education cloud and new one. So
I wasn't sure if this is still here. So this is something built by my friend John Brock. It's been out here a lot. This has been around for more than a decade. But it's just a perm. It's called perm comparator. It just compares permissions.
Oh, nice.
From particularly from one person to another. So if someone calls up and says, I can't do it, but so and so can, like, all right. So you can put in the two people, and you can see how their permissions compare. This has saved me, I don't know, months of my life. Incredibly cool and free, and it's just run by John Brock, right? He has no marketing. He just built the thing years ago and maintains it. So there's a lot of community things that are free and really nice. And also the Shiba was on the open source community has a lot of really nice free tools, and including now they've adopted Dolores. So the founder Dolores has just decided he didn't want to maintain it anymore, so he handed it to the community, and they're just adding new features all the time. And so it's declarative lookup summary here to look up. I just call it Dolores, but it's just it's like a roll-up tool. Incredibly helpful, super powerful. I love free tools. Anyway,
right.
I'm off topic, but I do love free tools.
That was super helpful. I guess the last 10 minutes was super useful.
So yeah,
I can present on free tools at different time.
And I guess we should do that. Maybe a session next time in the future and say, okay, come up with, especially other people can come up with the free tools too. And okay,
there are so many, and there's a lot of Chrome extensions too that are really great.
Oh yes.
And there are a lot of new ones. I'm a lot less hands-on than I used to be. So if there's something like latest and greatest, I might not know about it. These are things I've known about for decades.
Yeah. I think we are at time now, so we can wrap up.
Yeah.
And, thanks very much for the wonderful presentation and discussion. It really made our Wednesday so perfect. All
Yeah,
right.
thanks for having me. And someday I hope to be in San Ramon in person.
Oh yes,
that's one of my aspirations.
Here in the meeting in person would be perfect.
Good. If you come to Boston, look me up.
Yeah, we'll do.
Yeah, and Corey, perhaps I'll see you next week.
Northeast Streaming
on my schedule for Tuesday, or I guess Wednesday is the full day, right?
Yeah, Northeast Streaming. You can come learn all about SAS on Salesforce. That's my talk. It's a drill down into that very specific thing.
Yeah, I'm trying to get out for the day to rekindle some old friendships and whatnot. So I'll definitely swing by if I make it out there. Thank you for everything tonight. Nice to see you. Thank you, Shiba, family, for hosting.
Yeah, and, thank you so much.
All right.
See you guys around.
Thank you. Have a good night. Bye-bye.
Enjoy. Bye.
Bye-bye.
That was the meeting.